All right, we're live.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. We've got myself, Stefan, all the way from South Australia, Adelaide. And we've got Matt. I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, Matthew Score, all the way from not Australia, Indianapolis in the U.S. in the Midwest. So
from
go
where
ahead.
you'd rather be. From where you'd rather be. Like it's nice and hot there now, like we were just saying. Whereas here, it's not so nice. So yeah, what we're going to be talking about today is following on from like what we wish we knew, which was the last podcast last week, and it's going to dive in a little bit deeper into that hardware versus software aspect. And it is something from like my personal opinion that I wish I did know more about, because it gives me a different perspective of looking at things. And I'd like to know what your opinion is, Matt, because when you appreciate that hardware versus software, you get a much better understanding of what it is and then how it kind of applies to your sport, or it applies to your life, or it applies to lifting in a gym.
Yeah, so it's something that I inadvertently stumbled my way into in my career. So I guess we should define the terms first, I guess. So hard training hardware is muscles, tendons, ligaments, training the physical things that move your body around. So this is mainly in the context of sports. So like training your hamstrings, knee flexion, back extensions, your back muscles. And then software is the kind of mental things like doing, it would be like a speed ladder or
like the
juggling.
skill almost.
Yeah, like getting better at the sport would be, for the most part, practicing your sport is going to be software, and then in the gym would be hardware. So I sort of stumbled upon it. The benefit of the hardware when I was playing, because it was like, well, I can improve my skill, and I spent a ton of time improving the skill, but it's like people are neglecting the physical aspect of it. And for me, it was like low hanging fruit. Like I can get half a second quicker much easier than I can get significantly better at the sport. So it's not that I neglected the technical aspects of it. I put a ton of time in there, but at a point you get a little bit of diminishing returns, especially like working on your own. And it was like you could progress really quickly in the gym. And that doesn't mean you need to be a power lifter. And that doesn't mean that all of the training is going to work. But there's an aspect of you can only improve things like reaction time, like, I don't know, somewhere like 30 to 70%, less than 100% for sure. You're just not going to change it that much. But anybody can 3, 5, 6x how strong they are. And if you really want to get into powerlifters, I'm sure they get even more returns than that over the long term. But having the base of hardware for me was always something that's like, well, you can put in a little bit of effort to make a big change. And as long as you are putting enough time with your skill development and the software aspect of it, you can build off of those together where you wouldn't be able to if you just did one alone. So I don't know if that's something that you found kind of came to your conclusion, or.
Yeah, absolutely. I think from my position, and I've stumbled across this probably in the last month and a half or so, and listened to Keegan's podcast, which you directed to me, and to be able to get that different insight and that feedback about that understanding of hardware versus software, and not necessarily going in too deep to it, because you can get quite overwhelming. And the simplest way to think about it is like hardware would be a phone, and then like the body of an athlete. And then the software is the apps, the software that you actually put onto the phone, which helps it run, which is then that skill. And from when I speak to or try and educate, whether it's adults or athletes or just coaches in general, you want to try and give them the best example you can, so then it can be like, oh, I can interpret that in my head, that makes sense. So that's why I use the phone. Like, it's a piece of hardware, we can directly correlate that to being similar to an athlete's body, for example. But then the software is what is on that piece of hardware. And when you bring it back down to that level, you can almost go, so what tends to happen if you've got a an iPhone, the first generation iPhone, and you've got the software that's running on that, or the new iPhone at the moment, what's going to happen? It's going to lag, it might blow up, it's definitely not going to work. And you can kind of use that to then lead you into that next bit of education where it's like, if your software is significantly more advanced than your hardware, it's only a matter of time before that discrepancy becomes an issue. You know, you can only do as much as what your hardware allows, basically. If you keep trying to pump it up and keep trying to advance that skill as much as you can, there's going to be some issues. Now, whether that is injury or surgery or lack of athleticism, they're probably the three big things, especially in youth. Adults, you can work a little bit differently, but I think with youth, like especially at my soccer club, we've had 3 kids, 13, 14, and 15. And I reckon we spoke about this in the first podcast, where they've done their ACL. It's just like, that is unheard of to be doing it at that young in that same amount of time. Like, what's going on there? Why is there such, so many of those injuries that have occurred in that one time? I honestly believe it has got to do with the continuous software upgrade and neglection of that hardware. And then with that discrepancy, it's only a matter of time before something goes wrong.
Yeah, it is an important distinction. And then so even within hardware, I think there's the distinction to be made between muscle dominance and tendon dominance. And Keegan has talked about this. Keegan, the ATG mentor, has talked about this at length, and it's the difference between, so at the end of being muscle dominant, your muscles are the strongest. They're stronger than your tendons. That's what you're relying on. And then in the tendon dominant, your tendons are stronger than your muscles, and tendons take most of the force. And then all of the sports lie at different aspects on this scale. So it's a little bit different when you're talking about an activity versus a person. So you want a person to be entirely tendon dominant, because if your muscles are too strong, and they're either going to pull on the tendons and you're going to move, or your tendon's going to break. Because if the strongest force is coming from the muscle, either it's going to pull through the tendon and your bone is going to move, or it's just going to snap that tendon. So you want tendons to be stronger so you don't get the catastrophic injury. But activities are across the plane. So powerlifting, I think, would be the best example of a muscle dominant activity. Doesn't matter how long you take, as long as you get the weight off the floor on a deadlift, whatever. And you have to, all that force has to come from your muscles. Your tendons don't produce any force. It's transmitted through the tendons, but everything comes from the muscle. But then a marathon runner, you only have to accelerate once. Like, you create that force, and then you have a little bit of the muscle activity as you go through. But mainly it's those tendons bouncing and springing from step to step to preserve the energy, because it takes so much less energy and so much less effort to use your tendons than it does with your muscles. And you can debate plyometrics like that. But so we want you to be tendon dominant, but the more muscle dominant your sport is, the more muscle mass and strength you have to have.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, with that, your tendons have to follow. So we are football and soccer players. You need a significant amount of muscle mass. You don't want to be a power lifter, and you don't want to be a marathon runner, but you have to have the muscle mass. So some of the examples Keegan used was Adama Traore is like, he looks like a power lifter. But yeah. I mean, Cristiano Ronaldo, everybody knows him for being ripped. And you don't think of soccer players having a lot of mass, but if you watch the Premier League, there's very few people that are like sticks, like very like twig thin. Most of the people have a solid amount of muscle mass, because you need it to slow down, absorb impacts, just to play at a high, even just be fast. You have to be able to accelerate, and your level of absolute strength is pretty much the number one thing with your athleticism. And that absolute strength is going to have to come from muscle mass, or not athleticism, acceleration. So absolute strength creates acceleration, and muscles create the absolute strength. So if you want to be fast and you want to stop fast, you have to have the muscle to create the strength to create that acceleration and deceleration.
It's just a flow-on effect. Like,
yeah,
and it all just comes back full circle. And like, you did a really good job of explaining that, by the way, because it's like it can be quite confusing for people to understand, and that's the number one challenge, is to be able to explain it to athletes so they can understand how valuable it is for them. Because going back to what we were talking about last podcast, these are the things we wish we knew. Now, whether it's because we didn't actually understand it or we didn't have access to understanding it, I think either way, we still need to be able to approach it from a way that is like, this is what it means. This is how it's valuable to you and to your sport. Understand it. If you don't understand it, we'll try and work around that. But I think you did an awesome job there of like explaining like how it all comes full circle. And moving on from like the actual training aspect, specifically about that hardware style, what are your thoughts on actually encouraging that in with training? So within the sport training, do you think that it's necessary? And if so, how much or how little of it is important to the growth of an athlete? Because I've noticed that since I've stopped playing, I've been able to focus more on my hardware, and I haven't really gone back to playing because I don't really want to, but I don't want that to happen to other athletes. And you kind of want to have that happy balance of working on that hardware and not overworking on that hardware, and then not working enough on that software. So it's all about finding that happy medium. How have you, because you still play, so how have you been able to manage that while upgrading your hardware and software at the same time?
Yeah, so it kind of, a lot of it depends on your workload. Like if you're playing 2 matches a week and you're training 3-4 days on top of that, you're not going to be able to create the same level of adaptation that you would if you're playing once or twice a week, if you're in the off season and you have the time to recover. So I guess it's not, maybe not so much your workload, but it's the amount of time and tools you have to put in the recovery. So if you're playing once or twice a week and you're trying to create the changes, but you're eating like crap, you're not sleeping, and you're stressed out because your girlfriend's breaking up with you, you're going to have a hard time creating all the adaptation. But if you're an elite level footballer and you're sleeping 9 hours a night, you have the cold and the hot therapies, you have a massage therapist at call, and all your meals and micronutrients and everything are prepped for you, you could probably do both pretty well at the same time. But most people don't have this. So most people fall in the middle somewhere. So what we don't want to do is try to do so much of the hardware changes that it affects your competition. So we don't want to lift heavy every day and fry your nervous system, and then you get out onto the pitch and you're like, oh, I need a nap. Like we want the minimum effective dose that doesn't interfere with how you perform. So if that means you have to cut down and just do the most important movements at a lower amount of reps and higher amount of weight, I'll get that into a second too, then so be it. The most important thing is not you becoming strong, it's you being good at your sport. So one of the things that I've always learned, and I think it's really great, is rather than lowering the weight, so like if I had plenty of time, maybe I'm doing just, I don't know, 5 sets of 10 on a squat at a fairly heavy weight. Instead of doing 2 sets of 10, I would rather have us do 5 sets of 5 at the same weight. So don't cut the weight and lose that maximum strength adaptation. Cut the reps, save your nervous system, save your muscles, but still get that nervous system adaptation that's so important. I don't know if you agree with that philosophy. But
Yeah, absolutely. I started the dense, because that's pretty much dense strength, and I found some massive benefits. And I mean, for me, it's a little bit different because I'm no longer playing, so it's a little bit hard for me to compare because it's not comparing oranges with oranges, So for me, the adaptation has been different because I've been able to do that 10 minutes of one heavy rep and then rest and then load up again, another heavy rep, and just doing that and trying to progress that way. And I noticed massively, some huge improvements with my squat in particular. but I haven't, I can't, it's impossible for me to compare because I'm not playing. I mean, maybe if I was to magically go back, and this is something that has always been curious for me to actually do, is like me not having an ACL. I played for a significant amount of time without one until, just kind of a couple of negative things occurred and they were negatively compounding. And it was only a matter of time before my tibia dislocated, So I'm really interested, and almost like a bit of a test, I guess, for me to see if I can come back and be able to play without, going through
Mm-hmm.
those things again. And it's hard because when you are lifting, it's very kind of one directional. Like there's none of that stuff that happens in football with the twisting and the turning and the jumping and the running and, change of direction. It's just up and down, straight up and down, which I'm sure that if I was to train in a way that would kind of replicate the football aspect, that understanding of where your body sits in time and space, and actually doing so, like when you're moving, like where your knees position and trying to get strong in these positions where the ACL ruptured, which was in that position. And like understanding, you have a look at Michael Jordan, for example, and I've been watching a heap of his stuff and seeing how his knees like go in. It's like, you can't do that. Like, don't do that because you're going to hurt yourself. But the guy's been doing it for like, how long was he in the NBA? 15, 20 years? And he's been doing that and he's been an absolute superstar. So why then would I neglect that when that's clearly an issue for me? That's a whole nother topic that we can get into. One other thing I wanted to float by you is the idea of training jumping, for example. So like that proprioception stuff. If you were to develop that hardware, do you then think that it's necessary to work on that jumping, even though that jumping aspect, as an example of a footballer, is in season is quite looked at, I guess, when you're training your skill? Do you think it's necessary then to do it again, or do you think you get enough of it from the skill that you're learning?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing when you talk about jumping or top level sprinting, because it sort of falls in between hardware and software a little bit, because there is the skill aspect of it, but it's also a very tendon dominant hardware exercise. So that's one of the things, I was going to bring this up anyway, but one of the great things about ATG and what that's created is, in traditional exercise programs, the exercise didn't have any kind of tendon aspect. With the introduction of short and extreme long range exercises that we'll talk about, I believe, in the next podcast, you can get a lot of the tendon adaptation from exercises. So if you think about a reverse Nordic, the human knee extension, tons and tons of stress on the tendons. Same with like a Jefferson curl. If you really load it and really get to the bottom, tons of tendon adaptation. And again, there still is a difference with jumping and top speed sprinting, that it's really, really fast, 0.4 of a second less. So what I tell a lot of players when I talk to them is, how much plyometric load are you getting from your sport? So like a basketball player, if you're practicing 6 days a week or you're practicing 4 and playing twice, I'm probably not going to have you jump, because I can only imagine how many times you're jumping in practice. Maybe once in a while in the off season, we'll get you into a little bit longer of a top end speed, because it's a stimulus you're not going to get on the court.
Absolutely.
I mean,
yeah.
Your court's 90, 94, 92 feet. No idea what it is in meters. Something like 30 meters, but
yeah.
it's kind of balancing the stimulus of what you do get in your sport, what you don't get in your sport. So about sport like basketball, you're getting a ton of jumping and quick cuts and acceleration, but you don't get any slow strength. So we want to build the slow strength in the gym. We don't want you to go to the gym and do more jumping and cutting. How much of that can your body handle? And it's not developing the other aspects of it. So I definitely do. And if you're not playing so much, add in more plyometrics, because it'll keep you fast and it'll keep you explosive and continue to work on that rate of force development that is really important. But if you're getting a lot of plyometric load in your sport, slow down with the plyos, and I mean, probably slow down with everything else. One thing I really like is, and the dense method is great for it, is shorter workouts in season. And because there's some research with longer training sessions that your hormones change and cortisol release. It's complicated, and some people debate whether that's good or not. But for me, shorter workouts kept me fresh, kept me ready to train the next day, didn't let me go on and do too much. And so I think that's another really good thing. But I would, again, so back to the original question, with varying the plyometric load. You're not getting a lot of plyometric from your sport, add more in. If you're getting a lot, I'd cut it down to maybe a couple really good plyometrics, but you can get away with none, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, like you just said, that if you have so much already and you're developing so much of that, you don't want to go and stress it more. And there's probably more important things that you want to focus on in the time away from the sport than actually trying to do more and more of the thing that you're doing in the sport. And so if you have the ability to, it's kind of like, well, what's going to give me more bang for my buck? Is it going to be working on that plyometric stuff, or do I have all these other things that I can work on, which is going to be either like better for my sport, and like doing the jumping is probably going to be not as good for your bang for your buck, basically. And that's what it's all about. And you speak about time too. Not everyone has 4 hours to spend at a gym, which like you can't do that unless you don't sleep, which then that's being detrimental to your healing or to your recovery process as well. So I like the idea of short, quick, sharp workouts, which is like what you said, dense strength, whether it's one max lift for 10 minutes or you're doing the fives, whatever it is. Like, it's just all about trying to find that balance. And I really believe that it's a struggle for a lot of athletes, because they look at something and they go like, I want that. Maybe I just got to train as much as I can to get to it. But then if you do that, it can be detrimental to your performance as well as to your health. And so this is where, like for myself, which is what I'm really, really passionate about, is actually educating and getting them to understand that like more is not necessarily better. More of one thing of particular, whether it's hardware development in a particular field, yeah, that's good. But you don't want to do like excessive amount of that. Where can you find that happy medium?
Yeah, so one of the things that I absolutely hate seeing people say is, well, one thing, a very specific example of this is there's an Adama Traore quote. He goes, "Yeah, I don't lift weights," and people are like, "Oh, Adama Traore doesn't lift weights." And I think the rest of the quote is like, "But I do band and other work too, because I don't want to get too big." It's like people are like, "Oh, Adama Traore doesn't lift weights. Why would I lift weights?" It's like, well, are any of you Adama Traore? Like, do you look like Adama Traore? Because I'm 100% sure you don't. Yeah. Like, if you are one of the 0.0001% of naturally absolute freak athletes who are born tendon dominant with the genes to just look at a weight and put on muscle and still have tendons that are stronger than your muscles, cool. Don't lift weights. And then maybe somebody will have the argument like, oh, look at Riyad Mahrez, like he's a twig. And they're like, he's not that strong. Why do I need to be strong? Again, are you as technically gifted? And again, I'm sure his tendons are ridiculously strong compared to his body weight. Are you as good as Riyad Mahrez? And have you had 2 ACL ruptures already? Because at that point, it's like you need to lift weights, because 99.9% of people, and this is you and I included to the nth degree, are not nearly that physically or technically genetically gifted. Like, it's such a horrible argument to look at the top players. It's like, well, I don't see these guys lifting in the gym. It's like, well, first of all, they just don't show you. And second of all, you're constantly getting hurt. So obviously what you're doing isn't working. So that's one of the arguments that just infuriates me when I see it. Like, you have to.
I was actually having a chat with Andreas from Arizona, part of Freak Athlete, and we're having a chat about when you were a kid, you know how there were always those kids that were just genetically, they were good at everything. You know, they used to probably eat like crap as well. They wouldn't really work out, and they just jumped onto a soccer pitch and were just like, just, they
Yeah.
were insanely quick. They were super strong on the ball. And that's, like you said, that's that small percentage of that population, which is a genetic freak. You know,
Hmm.
there's always going to be that. But then, like kids, and what kids do is they will compare themselves to that person, or they're trying to compare themselves to someone else. And it's like, well, he eats like shit and he doesn't train as much as me, and or she doesn't do that. And it's like, no, that's not the point. That this is like the 0.1% or the 1%, the small percent of people who are just, they've got it. And you
Hmm.
unfortunately have to do, whether it's that extra work or eat healthily or recover more, because you have sort of started behind a little bit more, behind the 8 ball. So you can't, and this is again where the education comes into it. You need to explain that, and you need to give kids the reason why they are the way they are, and the way you are, like why you are the way you are. It's just the way that it is. And it's hard to work with that aspect, because kids just see something and they're like, well, I'm just going to eat Hungry Jack's or Burger King for, because Jimmy does it, so I'm just going to do it too. And it doesn't work that way at all.
Yeah. It's like, I think I mentioned this on one of the other podcasts, but like there was an interview with DK Metcalf, who American football player, 6'4", probably 230, ran in one of the Olympic trials. He's a wide receiver, ran in one of the Olympic trials, didn't embarrass himself. And he's like, somebody said, what are you eating today? He goes, yeah, I get a coffee from Starbucks in the morning. Then I eat like 2 or 3 bags of candy and have dinner and go to bed. I I sincerely hope nobody thinks like, oh, well if DK Metcalf, like, and he's absolutely shredded, like unbelievably ripped, and really, really good wide receiver, but he eats like shit.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for his sake, I hope he doesn't keep eating like that. But yeah, it's just, you can't compare yourselves to absolute freaks of nature like that, because even in the NFL, which is the freaks of all the freaks, there are the freaks of the freaks within that group that somehow managed to be a top level NFL player while eating like that. And who knows if he's lifting or anything, but you're not, whoever's listening, you're not him. So don't do that. I'm far from that. Steph, you're far from that. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
and who, you can only imagine if he like actually ate well and trained correctly and slept well at night, who somebody like that could become. And you see all the time these people that twig thin, freak athletes, unbelievably skilled, and then an ACL pops or the ankle sprain or something, and it's sometimes it's Derrick Rose and you're not the same player ever again. Sometimes you can come back, which would be ideal, but maybe if you would have trained properly and not relied on being a freak athlete, wouldn't have happened. You'd have had another season to get paid.
Yeah, it comes down to a lot more than like that physical side of things as well, because it could be that he just doesn't have that expectation or that stress on him to be like, well, I can eat like shit, so who really cares? And it makes me feel fine and I feel all right. I can deal with it at the moment. So I don't have that like mental and emotional stress put on me too. And maybe that's why he does play so good. But I definitely agree that it's only a matter of time before like you're pushing the needle way too far, and then all of a sudden, bang, something's going to happen, or I don't know, heart attack at 45 or 50 because you just have not been taking care of your body. And that has happened before. So, but anyway, another one done.
One more point before, and here's the other thing with that is it's also possible that you're just too weak to rupture your tendons. Like kids can do whatever they want because they don't have any muscle mass. Like small children have no muscle mass, so they can't produce the force a lot of times to rupture their tendons. As you grow older, muscle mass is easier to grow, and your tendons become, if you don't train them, become more brittle and less functional. And that's when it becomes a problem. So maybe you're just slow and you have a ACL because you're too weak. I don't know. But yeah, I just wanted to sneak that in at the end too. call a couple people out, I guess.
Yeah, we'll wait for all the hate comment to start coming through. Like, you talking about me, man? Why are you talking about me like that for?
Yeah. A little too
Awesome,
relatable.
man. Good work. Another one. Where can they find you, Matty?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok at Score Performance, SKAAR Performance. Where can they find you?
I am on Instagram and YouTube as well. Instagram is Coach Carly with 3 eyes. Like I said last week, 1 eye was taken, 2 eyes was there, but 3 eyes is better. So, and then just Coach Carly on YouTube. So we'll be chucking all these podcasts up, and then we'll sign a deal soon. What do you reckon? We're gonna find some sponsors or something. Maybe Freak Athlete is looking for a little bit more.
Hey, we're looking for the Joe Rogan numbers. So if anybody's interested. All right, awesome. Everybody. Thanks for listening, and talk again next week.